Okay, so the purpose of the MK Ultra program that the CIA did um, with that, and it was officially authorized in 1953. Um, it was discovery of following materials and methods which will promote the intoxicating effect of alcohol, which will render the induction of hypnosis easier or otherwise enhance its usefulness, which will enhance the ability of individuals to withstand privation, torture, and coercion during interrogation and so-called brainwashing, which will produce amnesia for events preceding and during their use, which will produce shock and confusion over extended periods of time and capable of surreptitious use, and which will produce physical disablement such as paralysis of the legs, acute anemia, etc. Okay, so these are the kinds of experiments they're doing. And they're wanting to discover what these effects will have on a person. So, the LSD experiments did result in the 2 deaths that we know of. Let's see if there's anything else. Okay, in universities, prisons, hospitals, they all were a part of conducting these experiments. And remember, these are unwitting citizens. They do not know they're being experimented on. I did watch an interview of a lady who was in the hospital for something, and they gave her LSD, and it changed her dramatically for the rest of her life. And if I find that video in my history, I will link that too. I will add as many links that I can remember where I got this stuff down below. So anyway, what I want to say is going back to the cults and things and how they brainwash, and Charlie Manson, is that the dates where where the CIA was doing these MK Ultra experiments, he was a throwaway kid, which was commonly used. And I found very interesting that the places where he was during these experiments. And my theory is that he learned everything he knows from being incarcerated, and he was the perfect candidate because he was a throwaway child. He was born in 1934. His mother went to prison 5 years later for burglary, armed robbery, and she was an alcoholic. So he went to a boys' home at the age of 5. Okay. And when she gets out, I assume he goes with her, and then she tries to put him in a foster home in 1947, and he ended up going to Gabalt School for Boys in Indiana. In 1948, he commits his first known crime of burglaring a grocery store, and he was sent to a detention center. He escapes and he commits 2 more robberies. He's apprehended, and he spends the next 3 years at the same place, except for the 18 times he escaped. Kudos to him for that. He tried. Okay, so Manson escapes in 1951. He heads west in a stolen car. He burglarizes 15 to 20 gas stations, and he's caught in Utah, and he's sent to the National Training School for Boys in Washington, D.C. A psychiatrist calls Manson a slick but extremely sensitive boy. Sounds like a perfect candidate, doesn't he? 1952 is when the project started. Okay, and the last act of criminal violence before the 1969 murders, Manson sodomizes a boy while holding a razor to his throat. And he's transferred to federal reformatory at Pittsburgh, Virginia. Okay, and then a more secure reformatory in Chillicothe, Ohio. He gets married in 55, and he steals a car, he's arrested, and he's put on 5 years probation. He broke probation in 1956. Or no, so he was sentenced to 3 years. So he divorces. His ex-wife takes his kid. 59. He's arrested for forging a check. And he gets a 10-year suspended sentence. And then in 1960, he marries again. And he's indicted. He's indicted for Mann Act charges, federal Mann Act charges, which I don't know what that means. But Mann is spelled M-A-N-N. And he's arrested. And he's taken to California. He's ordered to prison to serve the 10-year sentence that had been suspended in 1959. So then in 61, he's transferred to federal penitentiary at McNeil Island in Washington. He claims to be a Scientologist, and prison psychiatrists say he has deep-seated personality problems. 1961, okay? Murders didn't happen until 69. In 63, fathers a second child and divorces. 1964, Manson becomes obsessed with the Beatles and learns to play steel guitar. 1966, he's an aspiring songwriter, and he's in prison still. And 67, he gets let out, and he asks prison officials to let him remain in prison. But having completed a 10-year prison term, he is released. He heads for San Francisco. Yep. That's where the whole LSD social experiment happened. Maybe not all the social experiments, but I'm sure one of them was going on in San Francisco. Just my opinion. I give my opinion a lot. So, anyway, so in 69, he goes there. And then he, what's interesting is in July of 69, in March of 69, he does go to the Tate residence to get his music published. Then in July of 69, his music teacher is found stabbed to death. And on a wall nearby, in his blood, is written political piggy. And then in August, Manson tells family members now that it's time for Helter Skelter. I'm not going to get into that because there's a movie, and most of us know what happened. Or what it's about, the start of a race war, and it's crazy. So anyway, For the next 2 nights, they kind of scope out, and they end up killing altogether 7 people in the Tate residence and in the Folger residence. So there's 2 separate places where these murders took place. And the girls that evening that participated and the man that did the murders, that actually did the murders, were Patricia Krenwinkel, Susan Atkins, Tex Watson, and Linda Kazabian. And um, they had they had knives and they had clothes, and so that they could change afterwards. And they were woke up a couple nights in a row in the middle of the night and just given orders and told what to do. So you can see where sleep deprivation was involved there. And they admittedly had been doing a lot of LSD. Um, and he knew a lot of tactics. He knew mirroring and projection, and he knew how to use them. And because he was really blatant about it with these kids. I mean, now we would see it. I mean, this community would like, you know, no way. But these kids that he had attracted to him were throwaway kids just like he was. So it was easy for him to relate to them, and he was somewhat older than them too. I mean, he was in his 30s. These were teenagers that were running away from home and stuff, so they looked up to him. Yeah, craziness. So there's a lot of details, but he finally does get arrested in October in the desert Death Valley. And then they are held, of course, and they're having their trials, and then finally in 1970, I think it was 1970. A whole bunch of stuff goes on during the trial, but it's not real pertinent. Except for I want to find where they finally actually convicted him on this, and the girls. Okay, so the trial opens in July of 1970. And then they are the penalty phase of the trial is in 1971. So in April 1971, Judge Older sentences Manson to death, and also Tex and the 3 girls. Okay, this is where it gets interesting. So in 1971, we have this big, massive murder. Okay, gruesome, horrifying, creepy. The whole thing was just, it was scary. I remember as a kid just seeing a little bit on the news and stuff, and it was gruesome and it was scary. And they actually, President Nixon came out and he said, these guys are guilty, they need to be locked up. And the books were sold, the movies were in the works before the trial even began. So this was a real case where really these people were tried in the media. Um, and I'm just giving you the facts as I see them. So I'm not biased in any way. I find this incredibly interesting. So a year, not even 6 months to a year later, after these hor- horrifying crimes, they finally get a conviction. They're sentenced to death. They do away with the death sentence. Okay? Now, I ask you, why? Why, after the most gruesome murder that scene that we had ever seen in this country, or that I knew of at that, from that time, why, after all the sensationalism and, families going through all kinds of stuff to get to those trials and to get this conviction, why, less than a year later, is the death sentence overturned? Why is it done away with? I believe because Charlie is part of an experiment, and the experiment's not over yet. It wasn't over yet. They have to see how it plays out, how it's affected him in the long run, how it's affected those girls in the long run. He is still an experiment. And, he has to be at this point. Not just because of my theory, but because he exists. And just back to narcissism and mind control and programming, and how a lot of people just think, oh, it's not possible, you can't, like the three girls I'm kind of thinking of right now, like it's impossible for them to be controlled, mind controlled. I'm thinking it is. I'm thinking it is possible. Because I feel that I'm programmed to self destruct myself. I am going through a lot of work to deprogram myself from falling apart as soon as success is in reach, So, just some things to think about there. And then the last thing that I'm going to close with is um, the little commercial I did in the beginning. Well, sorry, Charlie. In 1959, Charlie was arrested, and his arrest record I will put also in the description box a link to. You know what he said his occupation was? Advertising. That really blew my mind. I thought, wow, he really did have a handle on it. He knew what he was doing. He learned techniques. He didn't come up with them on his own. So, be vigilant out there. Peace. Love y'all.